trying to send a message of unity during this difficult moment. Let's go back to Paula Zahn in New York, where she's got more details on this tragic day in Manhattan. Paula?
Thanks so much, Wolf. I think all day long you have seen the images replayed of exactly what happened here in New York City. The city, a victim of multiple attacks by hijacked commercial airlines. Joining me right now is Matt Cornelius, who was in the unfortunate position of being mid-level in Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Matt, thanks for joining us tonight. What happened? Where were you?
Well, I just arrived at work, probably about 8:40 a.m. I put my lunch away, and I was getting ready to start the day when all of a sudden we heard this tremendous crash. It was a really loud sound, followed by a sharp jolt in the building, and then the floor kind of seemed to wave.
We are looking at this incredibly dramatic shot of the impact of the American Airlines hitting the North Tower. You were not aware at all of what could have caused it.
We had no idea. Obviously, we knew something had struck the building. Somebody screamed out, "An airplane's hit the building." But I think that was just a guess. And when I thought about that, I thought probably a private plane, because you often see them flying around the World Trade Center. No one could have ever thought that it was a commercial jet plane of that size.
And your immediate instinct, I suppose, was to get out of the building.
Yeah.
Describe the evacuation.
Well, it wasn't, because people hadn't really arrived at work yet, it wasn't very organized. We basically decided...
Now that actually represents the second attack that happened 18 minutes after your building was struck.
Right. So when we got struck, everyone basically started running for the stairways. And we went in immediately to the stairways and started our way down.
Were people pushing and shoving, or was it an orderly exit from the building?
People were confused at first, but once we were in the stairway, people were very orderly.
How long did it take you to get out of the building?
About 45 minutes. Some people were upset. They had gone through the bomb in '93.
How could it take so long to get out of the building? You had 65 flights of stairs. You're a young man, but one would think you could get out of there quicker.
We moved very quickly, probably 15 minutes to the 40th floor. And then after that, we got held up. There were firefighters coming up the stairs, police officers, and I believe FBI agents. So they were coming up. And there were people, there was a man in a wheelchair who they were trying to assist, so we kind of had a hold for him. But people remained calm throughout this and kept saying, we're going to take it one stair at a time, everybody's going to get out. I think we weren't aware of the situation. We thought it was an isolated event. I think had we known what was going on, it would have been a different story. But
these pictures obviously show the unspeakable horror and tragedy, the fallout from which we're only just beginning to grasp. Once you got out of the building, at what point did you become aware of what had truly happened?
Well, I would say the minute as we came out of the building, actually exited the complex, the police officers were screaming, "Don't look up, don't look back, just go." And I, of course, looked back, and I saw that the second tower was indeed on fire. And that's when it hit me that this was something major. I mean, this was a real catastrophic event. And actually, when we came out of the stairs, there was a lot of devastation in the lobby, and actually the center of the complex, the plaza area, there was a lot of debris and some bodies. I mean, it was truly awful.
We have some shots now that we'd like to show you of what some people have described almost as a nuclear winter when they talked about the amount of soot coming down on those of you who were fleeing these buildings. Now that you've been able to absorb what happened, what's going through your head tonight? You must feel like a very lucky man.
I feel very lucky. I'm so thankful to be alive. My heart goes out to those who don't know about their loved ones or have lost loved ones, and it's still very surreal. I mean, I look down behind us and can't believe that my office building that I go to every day is gone.
Matt, before you got any further, we were just looking at shots of the countless number of New York firefighters that were on the scene. We are just getting information from a union official of some of the 400 firefighters that initially went into that area. 200 may have perished. Matt, we appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us tonight on this incredibly tragic day of our American history. Let's go back to Wolf Blitzer. Once again, Wolf, New York City officials are not confirming, nor is the Pentagon, exactly how many people were injured here or how many people died. I know Governor Pataki of New York was saying earlier this evening it will be many, many days before we have any of those numbers.
Those numbers are being collected, but I'm sure it's way too early, as you point out, Paula, to have even a rough guess how high that number will eventually go. Just to recap once again, President Bush preparing to address the nation in less than an hour or so, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern, an Oval Office address for President Bush from the White House. CNN senior White House correspondent John King is back on the North Lawn of the White House. John, you're back in the briefing room now. John, you were listening to that briefing when we went to the Capitol Hill congressional leadership statements that were being made. Was there any hard news that came out of that briefing?
Indeed, there was, Wolf. Some details on the emergency responses taking place. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, other agencies taking steps to provide medical and other disaster relief personnel, but also from the Treasury Secretary, Norman Mineta, a glimpse of what will be the near future, at least, for Americans now traveling around the country. Mr. Mineta saying as a result of this, first and foremost, that he will make the decision tomorrow if and when U.S. commercial air traffic can resume, all planes grounded at least through noon, he said, and when Americans do go to an airport or a train station in the future, they are likely to see a much higher level of security.
To increase traveler security. Travelers will indeed see increased security measures at our airports, train stations, and other key sites. There will be higher levels of surveillance, more stringent searches. Airport curbside luggage check-in will no longer be allowed. There will be more security officers and random identification checks. Travelers may experience some inconveniences, but we ask for your patience.
Now, the President is in the Oval Office with his national security team preparing for that address to the American people. About 50 minutes away from now, that address from the Oval Office. 4 members of the President's cabinet briefing here. They refuse to take any questions. White House saying that these cabinet agencies want to gather more information. Attorney General John Ashcroft vowing, though, that the perpetrators of these terrorist attacks, he said, would be discovered and punished. And again, much of the information dealing with the relief effort underway over at the Pentagon and up in New York City. The Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson, urging Americans, no matter where they live, to donate blood. He said that is one urgent priority right now. Wolf.
Okay, John King, we'll be back to you. But meanwhile, I want to bring in the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who joins us here in our Washington Bureau. Secretary Albright, do you have a sense, you studied this situation, 4 years at the United Nations, 4 years at the State Department, who was responsible for this attack?
I think it's impossible to tell at this time, Wolf, and it's very important to get all the facts straight. But what is essential is that the countries of the world who believe in democracy and human rights stand together. And the statements that have come out, I think, from other world leaders are very important. We all have to stand together. I ache for America tonight, but I know that we will rise to the challenge because we have the best system in the world.
Is there, given the earmarkings of this highly sophisticated, very coordinated attack, that some sort of state sponsorship was behind it?
I think it's tempting to speculate, Wolf, but I think that it's probably wrong at this time to make statements that point the finger. We need to look at the facts very carefully and then respond at a time and place of our choosing. We have the best military in the world. I have the greatest confidence in our military, and I support President Bush. We are all waiting to hear what he has to say. I think the unity of this country is now essential.
But even at a time of unity, we've heard from many members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans today, members of Congress lamenting what they say was an enormous intelligence and security failure. Intelligence in the sense that the U.S. apparently had no advance indication that this was about to happen, and a security failure that 4 planes could be hijacked simultaneously.
I think we will have a lot of time for investigation and finger pointing. I think today we need to offer our condolences to the families of the victims and the bravery of those who have rescued people, and remember that this country is a country of laws, and those who oppose us are only countries that do not believe in a system of laws and democracy and the individual freedom.
You just heard the Transportation Secretary, Norm Mineta, say that travel in the United States is not going to be as relatively easy as it's been. There's going to be much tighter restrictions for Americans. They will have to endure what many Europeans have been enduring now for several years, given the terrorist operations unfolding there and other parts of the world. It's going to cause a reaction, as you well can understand, from the American public.
I think that's the least of our problems. I know when I fly, I actually welcome it when I'm asked questions, and I think it is up to all of us to cooperate. But America can't be shut down. We have to remember that we thrive as an open society, and I think we have to take all the precautions and to try to find the balance between the freedom for which we are noted and the security which we need.
Once the United States learns conclusively who was responsible for this coordinated attack, what should the response be militarily and diplomatically, politically?
Well, I think militarily I will leave that to the defense people. I do know that we have the means to respond in whatever way we want to. We do have the best and strongest military. Diplomatically, I think it is essential to be in touch with our friends and allies, to seek their unified support. Terrorists know no boundaries, they know no limits, and this has been brought home to America this time, but other countries are being threatened, and we need to all stand together. Terrorism can only be dealt with internationally.
You were the Secretary of State when the U.S. embassies in East Africa were bombed. Many Americans were killed, many other nationals were killed as well. The U.S., while you were Secretary of State, did bomb some bases in Afghanistan believed to have been associated with Osama bin Laden. A Sudanese factory was bombed. Clearly, if Osama bin Laden was responsible for this current attack, which has been widely speculated, of course, the U.S. retaliatory strike at that time didn't appear to slow him down at all.
Well, there's no way to prove that, and the truth is that my worst day as Secretary of State was when those embassies were bombed and when I brought the bodies home and met with the Kenyans and Tanzanians who had been injured. The United States has to respond. We have to respond on the basis of the facts we have, not on the basis of speculation, and I think that the important part is for us to all stand together and be supportive of President Bush.
We're going to be showing some pictures, Madam Secretary, of some U.S. warships. Recently, we're in Norfolk, moving out into the Atlantic Ocean, up the Atlantic coast to get out of port. We're taking a look at some destroyers and some frigates now. These are pictures of U.S. Navy vessels leaving the largest U.S. naval facility in Virginia, in Norfolk, clearly perhaps sending some sort of signal, some sort of sign to others who may be out there. What is that message?
That America is strong and cannot be shut down, that we have the means to bring about some kind of a response to this, and that we have the strongest military in the world, and that we're proud of our military.
General Colin Powell, your successor at the State Department, returning tonight from a visit to South America from Lima, Peru. What should he be doing right now? What do we assume he is doing to generate international diplomatic support for the United States position and for perhaps some retaliatory U.S. response?
I can understand that he must be very frustrated not to be in Washington, because I was not in Washington when the embassy bombings happened. I was in Rome, and I came back right away, and what I'm sure he is doing is being in touch with his counterparts and mustering the kind of international support that is necessary, and I'm sure will be forthcoming from our friends and allies, because we're in all of this together.
Madam Secretary, it was good for you to join us on this horrible day in American history. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wolf.
Back to you in New York, Paula.
Thanks so much, Wolf. We're going to try to give you a better perspective of the state of paralysis here in New York City tonight. Once again, we cannot confirm the number of injured, the number of killed here today, but we have just gotten confirmation from a union representing New York City firefighters that as many as half of the 400 firefighters that were initially sent to the World Trade Center area are presumably dead tonight. We have been told that victims have been transferred to some 70 area hospitals. There are pleas for donations of blood from New York City. residents. I, in fact, tried to donate blood today, and there was as much as a 5-hour line of volunteers all trying to heed this plea. Right now, I'm going to check in with Greg Clarkin, who joins us from St. Vincent's Hospital, where more than several hundred of the injured were taken. Greg, what can you tell us tonight?
Yeah, we're about a block away from St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan. This is one of the locations that has been set up since for a triage unit, as a triage unit since early this morning. Really an incredible scene at the hospital. What you see is dozens and dozens of hospital workers outfitted in their scrubs, just basically awaiting victims to treat. At this point, what we're hearing is that the pace has slowed down considerably. We've just been briefed by the president of St. Vincent's, that is David Campbell. He says at the moment there are 319 patients at St. Vincent's. Of that, 50 to 55 are listed in critical condition. He also confirmed that there were 3 deaths at St. Vincent's. Also, New York Governor George Pataki stopped by. He spoke to the doctors as well as the victims. One of the doctors overseeing the operations in the emergency room today described some of the injuries that they saw early on. He said at the very early stages of this tragedy, what they saw were severe burns, a lot of trauma, and a lot of heart-related problems. Now, he said the heart attacks and the cardiac arrest could be from pre-existing heart conditions or possibly induced by the trauma that the people saw at the World Trade Center today. Now, tomorrow they expect to get a different type of injury. Right now, the Trade Center is considered a hot zone. There are no rescue efforts underway, the doctor said, but tomorrow they expect that hot zone to be lifted, rescue workers to go back in. What they will be expecting then is what they call crush injuries, and that could be broken bones, anything that happens by people being buried underneath rubble, kidney failure, dehydration, and the like. They're expecting to see a whole different variety of injuries tomorrow. So again, from St. Vincent's, which has been a triage unit throughout the day, the scene has slowed down a little bit, but they do expect it to pick back up when the rescue efforts resume. Paula, back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Greg. And during your report, I just got more information that the New York Police Department now confirms that there are 78 police officers on its force that are missing tonight. Right now, I'm going to turn to Richard Holbrooke, former UN ambassador, to provide some sort of perspective for us this evening. Mr. Holbrooke, we have heard General Shelton describe today's vicious acts as outrageous acts of barbaric terrorism. Senator Orrin Hatch called it an act of war. Senator John Warner calling it the most tragic hour of American history. What is your perspective on this evening?
Well, first of all, Paula, as a New Yorker and somebody who had the honor of being guarded by the New York City Police and working with the firemen, I am stricken beyond words at the information you've just mentioned about the death toll among the police and the firemen. I used to work in that building and was there next door during the previous attack, and as in the 1993 case, New York City citizens have responded in this extraordinary way. Your description of the attempt to give blood is so emblematic, those lines, and I'm just heartbroken about this. In terms of your question, and having listened to your interview with Madeleine Albright, I just want to add something to what she said, and that is this. In the past, Osama bin Laden and other terrorists who do not represent national governments, a distinction which is critically important, but are sheltered in various countries in the world, including Afghanistan, sometimes North Korea, Iraq, Libya, have played this shell game about where the government that shelters them and protects them says, well, we don't know where they are. I think it is absolutely essential for the United States to lead an international effort now that makes clear that any country which shelters people is part of an act of war against the United States. The United States, Paula, cannot make the response alone. It is true, as Madeleine said, that we have the finest military force in the world, and I've been privileged to work with them for over 30 years in Vietnam, in Bosnia, and all over the world. But I will tell you that unless we have international united front of the European allies, the Russians, the Chinese, and I want to stress this, the moderate Arab states, which must close ranks to get the extremists who are behind this we're not going to be able to succeed. This is the beginning. After we get through the rescue phase, after we find out how the security failure occurred that you referred to, that Wolf Blitzer referred to earlier, we're going to have to turn to an absolutely non-stop diplomatic effort to create the pressure behind which we can take the necessary military action against this act of war.
All right, I hear what you're saying, Ambassador, but it was Henry Kissinger who said earlier on today that we will be able to, or the United States at least, will be able to judge its friends by their level of support in trying to figure out who unleashed this fury today. What, though, realistically, do you think will happen in terms of resistance from some of these countries?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. I heard the interview with Henry Kissinger, and he and I are in full agreement on this. Any government which shelters the people who did this has to be held equally responsible for it as an act of war. And we are going to have to mobilize an international coalition for that position as we prepare to take the necessary military responses. And I know that Henry agreed with that because I listened to the interview.
Oh, no, I don't think I'm saying that anybody has misinterpreted the interview here, but I think there has been some suggestion by other guests that you may not get complete support here.
No, I don't know whether we'll get complete support or not. The Taliban is denying any influence in this thing, but all the evidence seems to suggest that. John King and others on your excellent coverage have suggested that the administration is 90% sure it's Osama bin Laden. If some countries don't participate, let them understand that they're joining a coalition of terrorists who have declared war on the United States. The key nations involved are going to be the moderate Arab states, the Russians, and the Chinese, and other countries which must isolate the cause of this. Osama bin Laden is not a government, but if he is indeed, as the administration appears to believe, behind this, anyone trafficking with him should be on notice that that is tantamount to an act of war by a government. And I talked this afternoon to the Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, who is trying to deal with the consequences of this for the UN. He's going to have to decide whether to postpone or cancel some major UN meetings that are coming up in New York, a children's summit in 10 days. And he has been talking to Arab leaders, and I think he will be very supportive of this. The UN will meet in General Assembly tomorrow to start the condemnation process, and we're going to have to conduct diplomacy alongside rescue and finally decide what the correct military response is.
Mr. Holbrook, we're going to have to leave it there this evening. Thank you very much for your insights and some of your poignant thoughts on what it was like to have once worked in one of those buildings that no longer exists. Joining me right now is Jeff Greenfield, who has some thoughts on the magnitude of what was witnessed here today. I know Senator Dodd earlier today compared this to the equivalent of the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Right, and you know, he said, I don't think that overstates it. We may find out it will understate it. When Franklin Roosevelt told us that many American lives were lost on that December 8th speech, he was talking about 2,400 American servicemen and women. Unless a miracle happened 2.5 miles south of here, we are looking at a death toll that could dwarf that. The largest act of violence in American history, Oklahoma City, 168 dead. More people than that died just in the plains. And when you and I as New Yorkers look and we realize the landscape of New York has changed, the Empire State Building is once again the largest building, I would suggest to you the landscape of America has changed. We are going to wake up tomorrow in a different country. Our luck has run out. 6 people died at the World Trade Center in '93. We saved thousands more because the buildings didn't collapse. We averted terrorist acts in the past, not today. And I think we will not get on an airplane the same way again. We will not feel the same way about our security again. I looked at some numbers, Paula. The largest number of American dead ever in one day in this country was Antietam, the Civil War battle in Maryland in 1862. 22,000 dead. I hope to God we don't approach that number when all is said and done, but we're going to be possibly in that ballpark. And I think tomorrow, in some ways, may even be a worse day than today because the sheer magnitude of this event has kind of got everybody just excited and wondering. Tomorrow, the reality sets in. And
I think you also talked earlier today how that reality turns from a sense of shock and in some cases a sense of outrage.
We've already heard Absolutely.
been handed this country.
And one of the biggest issues we're going to be facing is drawing the line between a response that equals the horror of what was done and restraint.
All right, got to cut you off here and go back quickly to Wolf Blitzer. I think Dick Armey is joining you.
All right, Paula, just to remind our viewers that in a little bit more than a half an hour from now, President Bush will be in the Oval Office to address the American public. He's preparing his remarks right now, but our congressional correspondent, Jonathan Karl, is up on Capitol Hill, and he has the House Majority Leader Dick Armey with him. John?
Well, Wolf, an amazing day up here, and we just had about 200 members of Congress, Democrats, Republicans, senators, and members of the House on the steps of the Capitol with a message. Now, we have here the Majority Leader Dick Armey, Republican leader in the House of Representatives. Mr. Armey, you were one of those in the top leadership of the Congress that were whisked away from the Capitol this morning to a secure location, a classified location. What was it like in that room all day today?
Well, we had the bipartisan leadership of both the House and the Senate. We were, of course, obviously, like everybody in America, seeking information, trying to understand exactly what's happening, where is it coming from, who's responsible, and how do we respond, measuring the threat to the nation and preparing ourselves to bring the members of Congress back to work at the appropriate time under the right circumstances and make the point that I made earlier. You may scar democracy, but you don't shut it down. We'll be back to work tomorrow. We think of this as a horrible criminal act. It is just inhumane. It's insane. And the American House and Senate, the Congress of this nation, as the President of this nation, will address that tonight. We will address the nation's business this week, and we will continue the process of finding the people who are responsible and bringing them to justice.
Now, I understand that at least 4 times during the day, the Vice President briefed the members of leadership that were in that room at that classified location. What did you learn about that 4th plane, the plane that landed in western Pennsylvania?
Well, we learned some things about that. At this point, the information is classified. It is clear that we do have a good investigation going forward. We are gathering information. There is a confidentiality on what we know, but we do know that this is a serious, premeditated crime, and that I can say without any doubt or hesitation, it's an international crime, and we will be able to find the people responsible in America. I believe, with the cooperation of all civilized nations, will bring these people to justice.
Now, over the Capitol Police radios this morning, there was a report that there was a plane headed for the Capitol building. What can you tell us about that? Was the Capitol in danger at any time during the day?
I don't know. We've tried to distill exactly what that report might have been. It could have been somebody's interpretation of the heading of either the plane that went to the Pentagon or the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. But there was a concern about the Capitol that caused Capitol Police, I think correctly and prudently, to vacate the building.
All right. Well, Mr. Leader, I thank you very much for joining us. And Wolf, tomorrow, both the House and the Senate will reconvene. This message that wants to be sent here is that terrorism will not stop the people's business, the work of the Congress from going forward.
All right, Jonathan Karl on Capitol Hill, thank you very much, and thank Mr. Armey as well. I want to bring in Senator Bob Graham of Florida. He's the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Of course, he's been receiving regular briefings throughout the day. We're hearing a lot of suspicions, Senator Graham, about who may have been responsible. Can you share what you know about that responsibility with our viewers?
I would agree with Madeleine Albright. It's premature at this point to be identifying who the prime suspect might be. The number of potential suspects based on the complexity of this operation is relatively small, and I think we will soon be able to identify who the culprit is, but tonight is not the night.
Has anybody definitively made any conclusions in the briefings with you and your colleagues about responsibility? Because, as you know, a lot of finger pointing at Osama bin Laden has been going on throughout the day.
No, at this point there has not been a single primary suspect identified.
Given the nature of this operation, the highly coordinated hijacking of these 4 airliners, is there some suspicion as well in the U.S. intelligence community that perhaps some government may also have been involved?
Again, it's premature to try to determine who did it and who their collaborators might have been. one thing we do know is that we are going to, as a result of this and other incidents, reassess our ability to identify and prevent this kind of event in the future. Right now, we're in the stage of responding to a horrendous event rather than where we should be, which is congratulating on ourselves on the fact that we identified and were able to interdict the culprits before they were able to act.
One of your colleagues on the Intelligence Committee, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, told us earlier today that as far as he had been informed,